Hi, everyone. This is Caron Whitaker with the League of American Bicyclists. Thanks for joining me for this Lobby 101 webinar. I'm going to talk a little bit about the National Bike Summit meetings and what to expect and how to prepare for it. We'll have another webinar in a few weeks on the asks. I will give you a little bit of a preview this time, but I have to say that the asks are still in motion. So I'll give you a preview of where we're going. And in 2 weeks, we'll hopefully have them all buttoned down and ready to give you specific talking points. All right. So first, I just want to make sure you're all aware of Riley Teitelbaum, who's the Education and Outreach Assistant at the League. They are in charge of setting all the meetings or working with your state coordinators to set the meetings. So most states have someone at their state group who has taken this on, and we really appreciate it. If there's any state coordinators on the call, thank you for all your work. Riley can help you with any of the logistics of that. Okay. All right. So that, oops, I just went past once. The theme of the summit this year is Bike Revolution. And we're calling it that because we're seeing so much new funding from the infrastructure bill happen. We're also seeing a lot of new policy that we really want to get implemented. So, and this year we are going to have both in-person and some virtual meetings. We're really trying to promote the in-person meetings, but we know that there may be cases where the only person from that district will be virtual, and so those will be virtual. And then, so what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about why we lobby, why we do this, what a meeting is going to look like. And so you're prepared for what's going to happen. We're also going to talk about how to learn more about your member Congress. And then finally, how to follow up. Because one of the things that happens, we're so excited to have you all either come to Washington or take part of these meetings at home. They really make a difference. But we can get a lot more out of it if the member knows you care so much, not only to come and meet with them, but then to follow up with their staffer afterwards. All right. So first, I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for everyone who's coming and taking part in these meetings. They really make a difference. The Congressional Management Foundation, which studies the effectiveness of lobbying, has found that constituents coming into DC to have a meeting is one of the most effective types of lobby meetings there are, particularly for members of Congress who, when you're talking about an issue that maybe they haven't really thought about or they don't have a strong opinion on yet. And to be candid, that's where most new members are when we're talking about bicycling and walking. Maybe they've thought about transportation or infrastructure, but they really, in a lot of cases, haven't thought about the importance of biking and walking infrastructure. So you may be the first voice they hear. And so we, again, just so appreciate that. And I'll say that in Washington, they really feel like the bike lobby is bigger than it is. And that's because we've just had so much luck with you all just showing up, making the meetings, following up on the meetings, and letting the offices know you're there. It really multiplies the effect that we can have, especially the few of us who are in Washington. And in the past, this is actually last year's slide, sorry, but in the ask we wanted for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we got everything we wanted. Last year, we had 2 asks for funding, and we got both of them in the House. We got one of them in the Senate. So the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program, is funded, and it got funded in large part because of not only the work that the national groups did, but the work that you all did coming to these meetings. So we have a record of success. And I would say, like, we have these asks and we want to make these asks and we want to make progress on them, but the long-term big goal is really creating a relationship with that member of Congress. And we want them to come out of these meetings, you know, hearing both what bicycling means for their district, knowing that there are folks in their district that care about it, knowing who to contact when they have a question about it, but then also knowing what we are asking for. It's also, honestly, especially for newer members, it's like a fact-finding mission. Having you go in and ask questions and get a sense of where they are on the issue can really help as we move forward over the next 2 years or for as long as they're in Congress. We have been able to shift people in the past, but it always starts by trying to understand where they are at the moment. So, so the strategy really is to be prepared, have an organized meeting, and then, to listen. We'll see when we do the lobby report form at the end, we ask you sort of what % of the time were you all talking as the lobby group versus how much of the time was the staffer or the member talking? Because that sort of tells us how much they're engaging, and we really want to engage them in conversation. All right. So, these are the objectives. Again, we want them to understand what the role of bicycling is. We want them to know what the ask is, who to contact, and we want them to expect follow-up. So it's really, we'll talk about this again later, but letting them know you're going to follow up is also really helpful. So if a staffer says, oh, well, I don't have an answer for you now, you can say, oh, when do you expect to have that answer? When should I call you back? So before the summit, we're going to ask that you do a little bit of research, and it should only take about 15 minutes. We want you to know, make sure you know who your member of Congress is. And if you just Google find your representative, you'll get a box that looks like this. You type in your zip code or maybe your full address, they'll tell you who it is, and they'll tell you what the district number is. So that's important. You want to get a sense of what their priorities are. If they've ever worked with us to co-sponsor any of our priorities. And it's also really good to know if they voted for the infrastructure bill, because that is something you can thank them on. And so some of the sources to do that is, one, to look at the local news, local papers, see if they've been in that, their website or campaign sites. For most of the people that are in Congress, you could just Google their name, but their website is going to be last name at house.gov or last name at senate.gov. So Earl Blumenauer is blumenauer.mail.gov. And as you're looking at that information, you want to think about how we can relate bicycling to what they care about. So, and we've created some cheat sheets to help you with this. And I say we, as a little bit of a royal we have some federal policy fellows this year that I'm really excited about, and Connor worked on creating these cheat sheets for you. So we're going to give you a link that's going to get you into this folder. It's and then you see that first folder is all the representatives, members of the House will have their own sheet listed by their district. So you need to know what district they're in. The senators have that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use the things in this folder and how to use those cheat sheets. But I also just wanted to point out that there's a document in that larger folder about how to use the information in this folder. And for those coming to the summit, we will have hard copies of the leave behinds that you're giving to the staffer or the member of Congress when you're there. We will not have hard copies of these. So if you want to bring it with you, You should print it out. These are not leave behinds. These are not to give to the staff. These are for you. All right. So this is what they're going to look like. The top, you're going to have the name, the district, and the party, their biography, what committee they're on, and then whether or not they sponsored some of the bills from last year. So if you're looking at the biography, this is Gwen Moore. If I look down here, I see she mentions that she's worked against racial profiling, domestic abuse, and for voting rights. So that tells me she cares about equity, and that may be something that you want to work into your messaging when you go into that office. She's also on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee that writes tax law. So, you know, we will have an ask that has to do with tax law. So that's important to know. If you're saying, how would I know what Ways and Means means? If you go back to that document about how to use these sheets, there will be, I have a list of the committees and what they do. And then below that, we can see that she has co-sponsored the E-Bike Act, the Bicycle Commuter Act. And so those are things that you can thank her for. It also can tell you you're probably going into a pretty positive meeting, a pretty positive office. She also, where it says voted on the IIJA, that's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That's that big bipartisan infrastructure bill. For a lot of people, they may not have co-sponsored anything, but they may have voted for that bill. And that's, and so that will give you something to thank them for. What I will say is for members who were just elected, we didn't have a lot on their biography. So their cheat sheets are going to be pretty small, which means that we're going to need your help doing a little more research on that. This is Senator Fetterman. We did at the League do some basic research. We didn't find a lot on everyone. I'm just going to warn you on that, but we did find that Senator Fetterman has had a nonprofit that helped bring bikes to the Pittsburgh Bike Co-op to get to kids. So at least we know there's some connection there. He's on the Environment and Public Works Committee, which is an important committee for transportation policy. So good to see that. We also know that his state got a RAISE grant. And that's important because if you want to talk about how biking is doing in the community, and if they got a grant or something like that, that's also something you can let them know, like, look, we're really excited that this bill passed. Here's a way that we are benefiting for it in our community. And some things the RAISE grants they'll know about, some of the other things they won't. So going back to this big sheet, you can see underneath that how to use the information in this folder. We have some files on grants and some other things. One are earmarks, so projects that members of Congress got into the last budget. We also have RAISE grants, and we also have the Safe Streets for All planning grants and implementation grants. So how to think about those? If you go into the earmark sheet, you'll see these are all the transportation projects that members of Congress asked for. And we and some of our national partners went through and labeled everything we knew we could tell was clearly bike ped or complete streets or something like that. There may be others, so you can see if you recognize something. I'm giving you Maryland because Maryland did a great job on asking and receiving projects for biking and walking. The other thing I'd point out, one of the reasons they did so well, is that Senator Cardin and Van Hollen clearly worked together to ask for the same earmarks. And in a lot of cases, they also worked with members of the House. So this is something else you can thank them for. And it's just nice to see what projects your member of Congress asked for. So on RAISE grants, again, we have a description of the grant and what the benefit is. So this is another way to say this is a great thing that's happening in our community. We're excited our community asked for it. They may say back, oh, yes, we sponsored that too. And then you can thank them for that. And then on the Safe Streets for All, there were 437 planning grants. That is massive. And they're basically Vision Zero plans on looking at what communities can do to make their streets safer for all users. So they're all vulnerable road user, biking, walking, rolling friendly. So if you got something there, you can bring that up. Like, we're really excited to see the community got that. Really glad to see the infrastructure bill pass, because that allowed this to happen. And I believe there is a grant in every state. So I think everyone would have something here to point out. So that's just a quick sense of a place to start to do your research. And if you'll have time to look at that, and you can ask us questions as we get closer to the summit. But I do suggest sort of checking that out before you get to DC or before the day of the meeting. So you have a sense. So then let's talk about the meeting when you get to DC. The general meeting flow, you're going to do welcome and introductions. Appreciation means saying thank you for something. Introduce bicycling in your district. Make the ask, have a discussion, wrap up, and then follow up. So this is from a few years ago when we were just doing virtual meetings. If you do have a virtual meeting, do get on early. The Zoom should be set up so that you don't need a host. So if you are talking ahead of time, just be clear that the staff member or the member of Congress might just pop on at any second. We did have one meeting get photobombed by a senator, wrong state, but so just know that can happen. If you are coming, oh yeah, again, also virtual, just make sure that everyone's comfortable with the technology. We also suggest that you have a group chat or message, whether that's texting or I don't know, Slack or something, just in case you want to talk to each other without everyone without the member of Congress seeing it. For in-person meetings, the offices are open. You do not need an escort to get to meetings, which is super great. You don't have to meet outside the buildings, but you do still want to be a little bit early. I do suggest planning as a group to get outside the office 5 to 10 minutes early, just to do a quick final check. Okay, is everyone here? Does everyone know what role they're playing? Okay, let's go in as a group. But this is great. The cafeterias are also open, and so you can walk in between buildings underground. So it just makes things a little bit easier. So again, once we get in, it's important to give everyone in your group a quick chance to introduce themselves. I always, especially if I have a group of people, I like to do just a quick time check. Hey, thanks so much for meeting with us. I have us down for a 30-minute meeting. Is that what you have as well? Okay, great. I want to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. Then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the district, and then we have some specific asks for you. So doing the time check, doing the meeting plan, and then sort of going into that, giving everyone a quick, what's your name? Where are you from? One sentence on why you care about biking. Because honestly, if you have 10 people and they each take a minute, that's a third of your meeting. So we really want everyone to say something, but keep it pretty quick. If you are on Zoom, you'll see I changed my name to have Caron Whitaker Bike League. You might want to change it. I grew up in Massachusetts, so I might have Caron Whitaker Beverly, because that's the town I grew up on, if that's where I was living, so they get a sense of where you're from. And then it's the thank you. This is Senator Bozeman from Arkansas. He helped get funding for the Big Dam Bridge Trail, which actually goes over a dam. But so that was a thank you that Arkansas has always used. You now have some of those grants you can say thank you for passing the infrastructure law. If you don't have anything like that, it's always better if you can find a transportation thing. If there's one thing that everyone in your group agrees that you can thank someone for, then thank them for that. But do make sure everyone agrees. If you can't find anything, then just thank them for meeting with you. But it's also a chance to say that you know what their role has been. And then, of course, we want to introduce biking in their community. So everyone might have an example of how biking has improved their district. Your district, you really want to sort of pick one that's a good illustration. Or talk about how the bill, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, has improved biking. If you have an example of that, you want to find something to relate to the members' priorities. I will say we do have a number of members of Families for Safe Streets coming, which are all families who've either lost someone to traffic violence or they themselves have had a serious injury. So this is also a time to talk about that, about how the lack of safe infrastructure has also affected people's lives. You want to engage staff, and then you want to try to segue to the ask and the discussion. And this is, introducing the bill. So we're going to be talking about truck safety. And you can say, hey, we wanted to talk about biking and truck interactions. And when there's a crash, there's some of the most deadly crashes. Something like that, you want to ask sort of open-ended questions like 10% of, think about like, how do you think something like this affects our community? Something like that. And your goal is really to try to draw something out of the staffer or the member of Congress. Try not to just, that's why we want open-ended questions. We want to give them a chance. Like, have you heard of any biking and walking crashes in our district? How do you feel our district is safe for biking? What do you think would make it safer? Something like that. And if you get a good discussion, they're going to ask you things, maybe about the district, maybe about these specific bills that you don't necessarily have an answer to. And that's okay. Just tell them, I really don't know, but can I get back to you on that? And then you can, if it's a question about the district, you can help figure that out. If it's a question on a bill, you can come back to us at the league and we can help find an answer. And that's an excuse for you to follow up with them. We'll give you fact sheets and talking points and information about how these bills and issues affect your state as much as we can. But we're not going to have the answers to everything. So it's okay if you don't have an answer. It really is an opportunity to go back. And then make the ask. Like I said, we'll have a webinar on the asks, we'll have handouts, we'll have some instructions. And you'd really love to have the ask sort of flow from the conversation. And in most cases, especially since these asks are still being finalized, it may be the first time that member of Congress or that staffer has heard about this. And they're not going to be able to say, yes, absolutely, we'll sign on to this. And they're not going to want to say no. So they're going to say something of, well, let me look this over and I'll get back to you. Or if it's a staffer, they might say, I need to look this over and talk to the boss. If they say something like that, that's when you come in and say something like, okay, great. When would be a good time for me to follow up with you? Or when do you think you're going to be able to have that conversation? Can I follow up with you next week? Would next Wednesday work? And because by letting them know that you're going to follow up, they're more likely to actually take that ask seriously. One of the things, we always want to work with the idea of respect, and that remembering that these meetings are really about building relationships. You're going to talk to folks who don't agree with what we're asking for. That's okay. We want to know why they don't agree. And we want to just really figure that out. The other thing I ask or put this in is that we really ask that you stick to the bills that we're putting out there with the league. If you want to bring up something that's happening in the state, that's great. Just make sure everyone in that meeting is prepared for that. We don't want any surprises coming out in the meeting. And that's part of that respect for each other. as well as just making sure everyone has a chance to speak or be part and participate in the meeting. A couple of scenarios that happen, your member of Congress might come in and say hello, ask who you are, and then be like, okay, gotta go, here's my staffer. That's fine, they do that all the time. That's what's happening in this picture. Liz, the woman at the end of the table, is the staffer. That's Senator Merkley from Oregon. He's just coming in to say hi. That's great. It means he thinks your visit is important, but he's relying on his staff to get all the details. That's how congressional offices work. The staffers know the detail, and then it's their job to brief the member. So that's okay. Still, you want to like introduce who you are, if you're with an organization, who you're with, where you're from. And he's going to know that just by being there, it means you care about biking and you care enough to come all the way to Washington, D.C. to talk about this or to get on that Zoom call. One of the most frequent things I think that happens is people come out of a meeting and they feel great, but they never made the ask or they never heard the answer. So just, especially if there's more than one person, if one person is assigned to make the ask, sometimes it's important to have the other person listen, because people get nervous making that ask and they're so relieved to have done it that they forget to listen to the answer. So you really want to make sure that that you have time to get there. And that's another reason why we say double checking on how much time they have at the beginning can be really helpful. So when we talk to the state coordinators, we ask them, one, to have a leader for every meeting, and as that leader to be prepared to redirect the conversation or to offer segues if the meeting's going too long. So if you're telling a story and the leader of the meeting says, hey, Caron, that's a great story about how by starting to commute by bike, you save this money, but I want to make sure we get to this ask. Just know they're just doing that to keep us on time and to get to that ask. We've also sort of talked about segues. I think particularly for virtual meetings, this is more important where you don't have the eye contact. So just listen for those. And again, it's to make sure we get through the meeting. Very, very rarely has there been tension in the meeting, but I always like, if you feel that, my biggest suggestion is to just like take a breath, try to repeat the last thing that the member of Congress or staffer said to you as a way to show them that you're listening, and that will give you a minute to be prepared to respond. It's okay to disagree. We just want to keep it respectful. And again, honestly, almost never happens. The last thing, which does happen a lot, is you ask a question and there's sort of this uncomfortable silence. And there's always, at least for me, there's this instinct to jump in and like try to make it more comfortable, say another question. I really suggest letting it sit for a minute, because it's probably just that they're thinking. And if they're having to take a minute to think, they're probably going to say something that's going to be really valuable for us to know. So let me suggest that. Then finally, at the end, you want to make sure to just wrap it up. Again, thank them for their time. Make sure you have a way to get back in contact with them. The state coordinator should have their email if they set it up, but it's always good to ask for a business card or ask them to type their email in the chat. Again, ask when would it be appropriate for you to follow up? When do they think they'll have answers to those questions? And then again, to offer to provide any more information that they need. Make sure you have the questions that you weren't able to answer, those sorts of things. And then post-meeting, I think if you're on a call, it's good to stay on the call to debrief. If you're not on a call, I'd suggest like waiting till you're either it's only your group on the elevator or you and your group are somewhere away from the office to take a few minutes to just debrief follow up on what information you still need to provide. You know, make sure everyone's sort of on the same page about what happened in the meeting. Decide who's going to send a thank you email and who's going to fill out the lobby report thing. And I always say it's always good to, you know, if you have an e-news, if you're part of a group and you have an e-news, go ahead and add the staffer to that. Or, you know, particularly if you're representing a state or local organization, like put a reminder to get back in touch with that staffer once a month, maybe every 2 months, just let them know what's going on and keeping them updated, keeping you in their mind. All right. Got a few more slides and then I'll stop for questions. I see some of them are there. So a couple of roles. We divide these up into a lot of roles. Generally, most meetings have 3 to 4 people, unless you're with us with the state, you might have more. But we do ask that there be a meeting leader who's going to moderate and sort of time keep. Some of the other jobs are sort of saying thank you. And then we'll have 2 to 3 asks. So you'll have someone who's ready to introduce that ask. Someone who maybe will prompt conversation if it doesn't start naturally, someone to make the ask. And then we have concluder, but that's generally the meeting leader. It's like, all right, thank you so much. Da, da, da. You really want to keep to the time frame unless that staffer has indicated that they're just happy to stay. And then, you know, we also have researcher or note taker. If you have someone who doesn't want to talk, those are some jobs they can do. Chances are you're going to have a couple of these jobs in a meeting. So, and we'll have a form for you to fill out, but we're going to ask who's there. What were their comments and questions? We talked about percent of time, of percent that was the lobbyists versus time being the member of Congress or staff. Anything they said that was supportive of biking in general, but also of these asks. And then who's going to do what on the follow-up. And if you have any questions that you need help from the league on, put it in that meeting form, because that's how we're going to know to follow up with you. It is much better to put it in the form than to just grab me at the reception, because I might forget. So getting it in writing is much more helpful. Your responsibilities, basically you're doing them, right? Watching this webinar, watching the Ask webinar, doing the research. There should be a prep meeting ahead of the summit that your state coordinator is going to put on. On Tuesday at the summit, we'll also have a state meeting there, so you can have that last minute organizational meeting. Read the handouts and materials. Troubleshooting technology, arrive early. Particularly if you're coming to the Hill, it's business attire, suits or something similar. And then of course, we just ask that you participate. And this we've talked about also, but that staying engaged. The work doesn't end just at the meeting. I can't tell you how many staffers will say like, yeah, I never talked to my boss about whatever people bring up unless they follow up with me. Because if it's something that they know the boss is going to say no to, they don't want to have to even ask them because they don't want to tell you no. And they don't expect you to follow up. So that follow up is really important, but also that building that relationship. And one of the things I've also seen be super valuable is writing up the visit and putting it in a newsletter. Maybe it's the newsletter of your state and local bike group. Maybe it's just your neighborhood next door and just being like, hey, I just went to Washington and we did this, da, da, da. Maybe it's an op-ed in the paper. We just had a great webinar on that that we can share with you. Any of these things can be really helpful, and then just send it to the staffer and be like, hey, just want to let you know, I wrote up our meeting and I put it on this neighborhood blog. They'll take note of that because then they know that they're not just talking with you, they're also talking with all these other people who you're talking to. All of that stuff Super helpful. And a couple final tips. Again, going into the meeting with a couple questions ready, and they can be pretty general, like, have you been biking in the district? Where were you? How did that feel? Did you feel like you could bring your family there? So we talked about this ask, do you see this having a benefit for our district? Do you have any concerns with that? Is there anyone else that you would like to hear from on this issue? And then, like I said, if you get flustered, repeat their last line, or even, I'm not sure I understand that last comment. Could you just repeat that for me? Things like that just give you a little bit of time and helps you reset. And then just be flexible. Sometimes staffers are going to say, look, we don't have any room in the office. We're going to meet out in the hallway. It happens all the time. Sometimes you have your questions ready and then they bring up something else. And it feels like a great time to go with that. Or they had a personal experience that you didn't expect, but is going to help get you to where we're going with the asks. You know, just be ready to be flexible with that. And I'll open up for questions. And again, if you have questions on the content or this, let me know. If you have questions on meetings or process, check in with Riley. So Connor, do we have any questions?
Yes, there's quite a few.
Okay.
So Kai Plaskin asks, do you know when we might have the fact sheets and other talking points?
Yes. So at the end of this, I'll talk a little bit about the asks, or about where we are on the asks. The webinar on the asks on the 22nd, I'm hoping to have the fact sheets ready by then.
Tim Blagden asks, I'm not sure if you're the right person to ask this, but or to answer this, but do rural states have the same level of concern about truck safety issues as more urban states? I'm not sure that's more of a question for the call, but
yeah, so how I can answer this is, as we were thinking about these asks and I was meeting with state coordinators last fall, I heard from a lot of the state coordinators, let's see, in Missouri and Illinois are thinking about truck safety. Both have a lot of rural areas, but also California and Massachusetts. So it seems to be an issue that affects states across the board.
Tom Lent asks, is there a directory of the states and their respective meeting times and the organizer, and whether there's going to be an in-person, virtual, or hybrid meeting, or other way for me to figure out how to find out about and plug into my state's meeting?
Okay. So we do have state coordinators and they are setting those meetings now, and they will, we can connect you with your state coordinator, but they will also let you know as those meetings get set.
Steve Arnold from Bike Fitchburg asks, says and then asks, we are lucky I've been bike riding with my member, however I won't be in DC. I have a personal connection with his district staffer. Should I have a mini lobby day and make the ask to the district staffer?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So we, and I'll say this, like at the summit, we have the summit meetings, but members of Congress are going to be on recess the 2 weeks after the summit. So if you're not in a summit meeting, you can definitely call up their district office and go in and talk about those issues there. The staffers in DC are generally the transportation experts in the office. So the folks that we're setting you up with meetings on the 29th will be the transportation experts, but the district staffers know the district. And they will say, hey, I'm getting meetings on this, and check in with the transportation person.
I'll be on Zoom, so I'll be able to be at that meeting as well. So this would be a bonus.
Okay, great. And we absolutely encourage district meetings.
Brad Bowers asks, working in a tri-state area, I am from the University of Cincinnati myself, go Bearcats. Would you recommend approaching elected officials in all 3 states?
I'm glad you asked that question. For the summit, we ask you to stick to the offices where you live. So if you're in Ohio, do the Ohio senators and your representative from where you are. Mostly because remember, the offices ask us for that when we're planning these meetings, and we want to be true to that. But we also want to make sure people in those meetings, that everyone that the constituents have a chance to be part of those meetings and to ask those questions. The one exception I would say is if you are representing a state biking and walking group, then you might go to some offices where you personally are not a constituent, but you have members who are a constituent.
Lindsay Epstein says, I'm attending the bike summit in DC. Are you scheduling the meetings for us with state officials, or should we schedule those ourselves?
So we are scheduling the meetings, or in most cases, there's a state coordinator who is scheduling the meetings. So, and those are generally people who work at the state biking and walking group.
Paul Suska from New Hampshire says, maybe appropriate to wait until the Ask webinar. When will the next opportunity be to ask for project earmarks?
Oh, great question. So offices need to put in their earmarks by March 31st. So if you want to ask for an earmark, you should be contacting that office now, and you should have information about that project, who supports it, what are the benefits, all of those things now, because the office is going to want to do some research before they put the ask in. So the summit is actually going to be a little late.
Amy Cohen asks, do we know when meetings will get scheduled? How late on Wednesday do you expect them to be held?
So the meetings are being scheduled right now. It really depends on how fast the offices get back to the state coordinators. And I expect them to go till 5. But we'll send out a list of the state coordinators. Maybe next week. I want to let them know that that's coming first, but
you never know when, right? So this is
they
probably
may be able to tell you when things are done. Hey, folks, if you're not muted, could you please mute yourself?
a month later.
Okay.
Kai Plaskin asks another question. He's going to be, or they are going to be traveling on the 22nd. Can we ensure that the asks are all sent via email as opposed to?
Yes, we will send a recording of the webinar. We will send the slides to the webinar, and we'll send the fact sheets.
Ann Savage says, we have at least one person from our state interested in joining us for Lobby Day, but they can't come to the summit. Is that okay?
Well, so we really ask that people at least register virtually. What we have said is if they're an important political district, we are trying to make some exceptions, but I would say contact me offline on that one.
Paul Seska asks, how will we Zoom into the meetings? Will we, as in the remote participants, be visible?
Yes, you will be visible. And when the meeting gets set, you'll be sent a link to join.
And then Lindsay Epstein asks, is anyone from the Congressional Brain Injury Task Force attending? Cycling is the #1 sport to cause brain injuries.
So we're not having members of Congress at the summit itself. We are setting meetings to meet with those offices, and then there is the congressional reception Wednesday night, and so we'll have members of Congress there.
Lisa Brady says, for states that have some people coming to DC and some staying in the state, we're setting up virtual meetings. For us in DC, where is the best place to hold these virtual meetings? At the church, the cafeteria, at the hotel, or
yeah. So we will, for folks who came last year, we'll have that church again. It had a room upstairs. It had a lot of rooms downstairs. It has decent Wi-Fi, but if we have 50 meetings going on, it can be challenging. I think that will be the best place because we are really pushing for those in-person meetings.
And then Kai Plaskin asks, is it's okay to ask to take pictures, right? Do we do it at the beginning or end?
It's great to ask to take pictures. Yeah, you can ask it, you can ask them, like, we'd love to get a picture. Should we do it before the meeting starts or wait till the end? I would say if you do it at the beginning, I would just try not to take 20 minutes taking your picture. But sometimes the member of Congress is going to be there at the beginning, not the end. So that's the balance.
And then, that's it for questions so far.
Okay, so great. I'm going to do a couple of slides on what I'm hoping, what right now the thinking the asks will be, what everybody's been waiting for. Oops. So first, I just want to say the state of play in DC, it's still very murky. They've been really slow to get organized. And they're just really slow to sign on to anything. But this year I'm trying to focus on things that were left out of the infrastructure bill or the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the climate bill that passed in September. We're not doing any big asks for funding because basically the majority in the House has been clear they're not going to support any of that. We are at the point where I know what we want. Or what we want to ask for. We're talking with congressional leaders and we're sort of finding agreement on next steps. So that's where we are. So, and the three issues we're looking at are truck safety. We are looking at the e-bike rebate and also just improving the safety language from IIJA. So truck safety. What we've learned is that while 4% of registered vehicles are large trucks, they're responsible for 11% of bicyclist fatalities and about 7% of pedestrian fatalities. We also basically know what the answer is. There's been a lot of research that's found that side guards or lateral protecting devices can stop a cyclist from getting sucked under the truck, because when the truck passes you, there's a vacuum under that trailer. And if there's a protection device like you're seeing on the right here, you will basically bounce off of it. You won't get sucked under. The other is when a truck is turning, what happens is if the bicyclist and the truck hit, the bicyclist falls, and lots of times it's not the actual crash that kills you, it's getting crushed by the back wheel of that truck. And so again, the side guard keeps the cyclist from getting under there. And we've seen it work in the UK. They are requiring LPDs on certain trucks. And they've seen that when we do have truck bike crashes there, bicyclist fatalities are reduced over 60%, 61%. So it can make a big difference. And within so what we want is for NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, we want them to be required to have these LPDs or these side guards. And we need them to both meet the goal of stopping cars from going under the trucks, but also to stop bicyclists and pedestrians from getting sucked under. And those requirements might be a little bit different. What the infrastructure bill said was that it requires research on side guards. It doesn't require actual side guards. And what Congress is saying now is we need to see the research before we know. Now, there is research that's been done, but it hasn't been done by NHTSA. So that's what we want. So our long-term goal is to get those LPDs. Our short-term goal is to ensure whatever research NHTSA does includes research with people biking, walking, and other vulnerable road users. Because it is possible to build some sort of side guard that will stop car crashes, which we want to stop as well, but we want to make sure that they also protect bicyclists and pedestrians. And so I'm working with members of Congress to get a letter written. And there's two ways that we can do this. One is that they can write a letter directly to NHTSA and say, hey, please do this. The other thing they can do is put that requirement in the long-term budget. And so we're working out with congressional offices which way they want to go. Either way, it's a letter that we're going to ask members to sign on to. And that's why I don't have the fact sheet and things now, because the members of Congress are still debating about which way they want to do it. But if you want to learn more about mitigating truck bicycle crashes and fatalities from that, we did have a webinar on March 22nd, and we'll put the link to that webinar in the chat. And Alex Epstein, who's on that webinar, he's really the leader in the US on looking at truck safety and bicyclists and pedestrians. The other thing is that I am expecting the E-Bike Act to get introduced next week. So this is the Electric Bicycle Incentive Kickstart for the Environment Act. The acronym is E-Bike. And basically, it will create a 30% tax rebate for the purchase of an e-bike, the limit of one purchase per person. It has to be for personal use, but it will be fully refundable. And I believe it will be that you can get that discount at the point of sale, which can really help low income or middle income purchasers versus having to wait till the end of the year when you file your taxes. And we should have more on that by the end of next week. And then the last ask is this idea of access to safety funds. So under the IIJA, there were 3 changes to safety and biking and walking safety that were in the bill. One is that all states have to do a safety assessment. So they have to look at all of the vulnerable road user fatalities and serious injuries anywhere in the state. They have to decide where their high injury network is, or those, theirs with highest injuries. And then they have to propose a solution. So states are working on that now. So that's one thing. The second thing is that there was a special rule that said, hey, if 15% or more of your overall fatalities are people biking and walking, then you need to spend 15% of your safety infrastructure money on that. And then the third piece we put in there was that, or that we worked on, was that it allowed states to use some of their safety dollars as local match for a transportation alternatives project. So transportation alternatives project, that transportation alternatives is the biggest source for funding for biking and walking. One of the biggest problems local governments have is finding that 20% for the local match. So this was saying, hey, if that project, that local priority is going to improve safety, you can use safety dollars as the match. That is not working exactly how we had hoped, in part because the plans for the safety dollars come from the state and transportation alternatives comes from the local government, and they're just not meeting in the middle. And so we're trying to figure out how to fix that. So we're working on a bill that would lower that barrier to using that as a match, and that would allow states to fund those safety projects at 100%, even if they're just using safety money, fund it up to 100% federal dollars. And we also want to highlight the need to close gaps in biking and walking networks. So that's the goal. What we're finding is even these states that where 15 to 20% of their fatalities or more are bicyclists and pedestrians are saying, oh, we don't have any projects to fund that have ticked all these boxes. So we're trying to say, like, there's got to be a way to fund these projects if you've got that many fatalities. This this is our goal. We're hoping to get it in time for the Senate, in time for the summit. And we will let you know on the 22nd if we've been successful with this. There's just been some technical difficulties, but our goal would be that if Congress does some technical fixes to the infrastructure law, that big law, they could just scoot this in there and say, hey, this isn't, we meant for this to work and to be easier. Here's how we think we could make it easier. So those are the 3 bills we're working on, and we got a few minutes. I can answer any questions on those or anything else.
Okay. Starting with Kai Plaskin, that's kind of a big question. I'll come back to it. Lindsay Epstein asks, will Pete Buttigieg be president at any point because he's awesome and he runs the NHTSA and is a cyclist? Yeah.
So we were lucky enough to have Pete Buttigieg the last 2 years. He can't make it this year, but we will have Keith Benjamin, who's with the Federal Highways Administration. And then we're going to have an overall panel from US DOT leadership talking about how their equity work overlays with their biking and walking work. So I think that should be really interesting.
Brad Bowers asks, will the ask about truck safety include anything about SUVs and pickup truck standards?
That's a great question. It will, the ask on truck safety does not talk about SUVs and pickup trucks, but we are going to have a session on that at the summit, looking at direct vision standards. And some work that the private sector is doing to actually create an overall standard, which will then give us an opportunity as advocates to ask for vehicles to meet it. So we're working on that issue. It's not yet ripe for a congressional ask.
Steve Arnold asks, is $1,500 the rebate limit or the price on which the rebate is based?
It is the rebate limit, so it would be 30% on the first $5,000 towards a e-bike, but the bike could be up to $8,000. You just wouldn't get a discount on those, on the cost beyond $5,000.
Paul Seska also asks, does the e-bike act cover conversion kits?
I don't believe it does at this point. Again, by next week, we'll have the final language. I will say one thing we're trying to address is that in the Build Back Better IRA, for folks who followed it last year, the e-bike benefit had an income cap at $75,000. And part of what happened is in the bill that we worked on, there wasn't an income cap, and so Congress put one on. This year, the bill will have an income cap, but I believe it will be set at $150,000, which covers most Americans. And the idea was it's better for us to set a cap than to let others set the cap.
And then Corey Hannigan also says e-bike battery fires have been in the news lately, at least in the New York City area. May want to be ready to respond to those concerns when we make the ask, which is more of a statement. But Susan Grasso says, my state is not utilizing available transportation alternative program funding, and it is lapsing. Can you tell why this is happening? Is it related to this ask?
It's not necessarily related to the ask. That's Nevada. If funds that are lapsing this year are funds that the state was given 4 years ago, but
This is
yeah,
Vermont, Karen, Vermont.
Vermont.
Yeah.
Again, it was funds 4 years ago. Well, let me look into that. I don't have an answer off the top of my head. On the battery fires, one of the arguments for raising the cost of the bikes that qualify is that a lot of the fires come from the cheaper bikes, e-bikes.
And then Lindsay Epstein says, any legislation promoting accessibility cycling or accessibility sports or safety increases for the disabled?
There is not such a bill introduced now, but I think one of the arguments about building separated facilities and looking at design guides for better facilities is to make them accessible for more people. And those are things we're working on, but they're not legislative asks at the moment.
And then coming back to Kai Plaskin's question, these are great asks and pretty simple, geared towards success. Is there another bigger issue we might want to mention?
So one of the reasons we were so successful in the infrastructure bill is that we had bipartisan support for our asks. One of my, and for just biking in general, maybe not those pieces of legislation, but we didn't really have any strong opposition. This year, with Congress so focused on cutting the budget, I'm really concerned that we're going to see proposals to cut funding for biking and walking is not necessary. And so the way that we can help with that at this summit is that first part of the meeting and talking about how valuable biking is to your community, talking about how the community is benefiting from that infrastructure bill, from any of those grants, and just showing that there is support from your community. So those are some of the things I'd really love to see people emphasize. If that will be proactive. I haven't seen any attacks. Just having been around in 2010, the last time Congress really was focused on reducing the budget, we did see those questions then.
I think that's it for questions then.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. We will send the recording and the slides, and we'll get you access to the cheat sheets and all of that by the end of the week. If you have any other questions about how to lobby or the asks, you can check in with me. If you have questions about the meetings, you can check in with Riley, and then we will connect you to your state coordinators probably next week. Thanks for being here.